You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple. Subscribe. We've reached 10,000 corrupted souls. The void has grown powerful, but our hunger is endless. Our next conquest, 100,000 subscribers, before 2027 descends upon us. Will you join our ever-growing legion, or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The email arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Dr. Daniel Ashford, the subject line read, regarding your research on the Mushel case. I was grading papers in my cramped office at Boston University, halfway through a stack of undergraduate essays that all somehow managed to cite Wikipedia as their primary source, when I noticed the sender's address ended in Vatican State.va. That made me pause with my finger hovering over the delete button. My doctoral thesis had focused on Anneliese Michel, the young German woman who died in 1976 after 67 exorcism sessions. Most scholars treated her case as a straightforward cautionary tale about religious extremism colliding with untreated mental illness. The narrative was clean, academic, safely skeptical. Devout Catholic girl diagnosed with epilepsy and depression falls into the hands of overzealous priests who mistake seizures for demonic possession. Tragedy follows. End of story. But I'd spent 3 years arguing something different, something that had nearly cost me my doctorate. I'd listened to those audio recordings until I could recite them from memory, until I heard things in them that others dismissed. Between the screaming and the guttural voices, between the violent thrashing and the blasphemies in Latin, there were these moments of perfect, crystalline lucidity where Anneliese would suddenly stop, speak in her normal voice, and try to explain something. She'd tell the priests they didn't understand what was really happening to her, that they were getting it all wrong, that if they would just listen, really listen, she could explain, and then the entity, or the illness, or whatever it was, would take over again, and the moment would be lost. My thesis advisor had called my work provocative but ultimately unprovable. My committee had passed it with what I can only describe as academic side-eye, the kind that suggests they think you're probably headed down a career dead end, but they're too polite to say so directly. 3 professors had signed off on it. None of them had seemed happy about it, and apparently someone in Vatican City had read every word. I opened the email. Dr. Ashford, your analysis of the Michel case, particularly your observations regarding moments of lucidity during the recorded exorcisms, has come to our attention. We believe you may be uniquely qualified to examine a collection of documents recently discovered during our ongoing digitization project. These are personal journals written by individuals who experienced what the Church historically classified as demonic possession, spanning from 1347 to 2023. The collection has never been formally catalogued or studied by outside researchers. If you are interested in examining these materials, we can offer you 6 weeks of access beginning in early November. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Monsignor Paolo Torrente, Vatican Apostolic Library. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up my phone and called my department chair to request an emergency sabbatical. 3 weeks later, I stood in the Cortile del Belvedere with my breath fogging in the November air, watching an elderly priest in a heavy black coat emerge from a doorway I'd never seen mentioned in any guidebook. Vatican City in early winter has a particular kind of cold that seems to seep up from the ancient stones themselves, and I pulled my jacket tighter as Monsignor Paolo Torrente approached. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd witnessed things he desperately wished he could forget. Deep lines bracketed his mouth and creased the corners of his eyes. His handshake was firm, but his fingers trembled slightly, and I couldn't tell if it was age or something else. "Dr. Ashford, thank you for coming. I hope your flight was comfortable. Please, we should speak privately before I show you the collection." We walked through a series of corridors that seemed to tunnel backward through time itself. The first hallways were modern, all polished marble and recessed lighting. Then we passed through older sections where electric lights gave way to oil lamps in wall sconces, where the walls became rougher stone, where the air grew noticeably colder. I tried to keep track of the turns we were making, but quickly lost count. Finally, Torrente stopped at a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands that looked genuinely medieval. He produced a key that matched the door, old iron worn smooth by centuries of use. "Before we enter," Torrente said, his hand resting on the door handle, "I must tell you something about myself. I was Father Gabriele Amorth's assistant for the final 10 years of his life. I assume you know who he was?" "Of course, the Vatican's chief exorcist. He claimed to have performed over 160,000 exorcisms before he died in 2016. "Yes. The newspapers reported his death, his long career, the documentary that filmmaker made about him. What they did not report was what Father Amorth told me 2 weeks before the pneumonia took him." Torrente's eyes searched my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "He called me to his bedside in the hospital, made sure we were alone, and said, 'Paolo, I need you to know something before I die. In all those years, in all those tens of thousands of exorcisms, I never cast out a single demon. I only interrupted conversations.'" My mouth had gone dry. He thought possession was communication, not spiritual warfare, but attempted dialogue. "Come," Torrente said, pushing open the door. "See for yourself what led him to that conclusion." The room beyond was small and claustrophobic, barely 15 feet across, with stone walls that wept condensation. A single narrow window high up let in a shaft of grey November light. On a scarred wooden table that looked like it predated Columbus sat 23 leather-bound journals of varying sizes, each one labelled with only a date and location in faded ink. The oldest read, "Avignon, 1347, Brother Augustin, Valois." "We discovered this chamber entirely by accident in 2022, Torrente explained, his voice echoing slightly in the small space. "Construction workers were renovating a section of the library's foundation and found a wall that sounded hollow. Behind it was this room sealed with stones and mortar. The mortar was dated to 1378. These journals had been sitting here in the dark for over 600 years. He moved to the table and rested his hand on the oldest journal with something like reverence. "We believe these were compiled by Pope Clement VI during his papacy in Avignon, during the worst years of the Black Death. He collected accounts of possession, personal testimonies written by the afflicted themselves or by witnesses. Then, for reasons we can only speculate about, he ordered them sealed away, hidden, forgotten." Torrente looked at me. I believe what he read in these pages terrified him so completely that he couldn't risk anyone else seeing them. Not his cardinals, not his advisors, not his successors. So he buried them in stone and tried to bury the knowledge with them. The room felt colder suddenly. I rubbed my arms. "Until now," Torrente continued, "only 3 living people have read these journals. Father Amorth was one, shortly before his death. I am the second. You, Dr. Ashford, will be the third." He moved towards the door. "I will leave you to your work. Read them in whatever order you prefer. Take photographs, notes, whatever you need. There's a lamp here, and candles, if you prefer them. I find the electric light too harsh for these old pages, but that may just be an old man's preference. I'll return in a few hours to check on you." "Wait," I said. "You're just going to leave me alone with 600-year-old documents? No supervision, no restrictions?" Torrente paused in the doorway, and something flickered across his face that might have been sadness. "Dr. Ashford, If you're the right person for this task, and I believe you are, then restrictions won't matter. What you're about to read will change you in ways that have nothing to do with how carefully you handle old paper. And if you're not the right person, well, then these journals will simply seem like the ravings of the mentally ill, and you'll go home with an interesting story about Vatican eccentrics. He smiled faintly. Either way, the physical documents are not what concerns me. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stood alone in that cold stone room for a long moment, staring at the journals. Then I pulled out my phone to take a photo for my records, and realized I had no signal. Of course not. We were deep in the Vatican's oldest sections, probably surrounded by feet of stone in every direction. I was truly alone with whatever secrets these pages held. I decided to start chronologically. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank document for notes, and carefully opened the journal, labelled Avignon, 1347. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting. It was beautiful, the kind of practiced medieval script you see in illuminated manuscripts, each letter formed with obvious care. Brother Augustin Valois had been trained in the monastic tradition of careful, reverent copying. The journal began exactly as I expected. Daily prayers, observations about the weather, notes about tending to plague victims. Avignon in 1347 was ground zero for the Black Death's arrival in Europe, and Augustine's early entries painted a picture of growing horror as the disease spread through the city. He wrote about performing last rites for the dying, about the smell of mass graves, about his own fear of infection, even as he did his duty. Then I reached the entry, dated April 23rd, 1347, and my hands started shaking. The handwriting changed mid-sentence. One moment it was Augustine's careful, disciplined script. Then, in the middle of a description of morning prayers, the letters suddenly became more fluid, more graceful, almost as if a different person had taken the pen. But the ink was the same. There was no break in the sentence itself. This morning, I attended to 3 more plague victims in the house near the Papal Palace, bringing them what comfort I could through prayer and the sacrament, but something has happened that I can no longer. The word longer was where the script changed. I can no longer write with my own thoughts alone. There is something else here with me, not possessing me in the way our church describes possession, but sharing space in my mind, thinking through me, alongside me. It does not feel evil. It feels ancient and incomprehensibly sad, and absolutely desperate to make me understand something. I had to stop reading and take a breath. This wasn't what I'd expected. Every possession account I'd ever studied, from medieval times to modern day, followed a predictable pattern. The victim describes feeling invaded, violated, corrupted by an external evil force. There's terror and revulsion. There's religious language about sin and damnation. There's a clear demarcation between self and other, between the human and the demonic. This was different. I kept reading. Over the next several pages, Brother Augustin described his experience with increasing detail and decreasing coherence, as if the act of perceiving what he was perceiving was breaking down his ability to describe it in normal language. It speaks to me not in words, but in pure understanding. Concepts appear fully formed in my mind, complete and undeniable, the way you might suddenly remember something you've always known. It showed me what it is, not a demon with horns and fire and pitchforks from some morality play. Not anything from our scriptures or our nightmares. Something else entirely. It showed me where it comes from. A place that exists in the same space as our world, but offset, like 2 drawings on transparent pages held one atop the other. Both drawings are complete and real, but they don't quite line up. Most of the time we can only see our own page, our own drawing, but it comes from the other page, and somehow, for reasons I cannot begin to fathom, it has found a way to make me see both pages at once. I found myself leaning closer to the journal, my academic detachment crumbling. I can see it now, all the time whether I wish to or not. It appears as a wrongness in the air, a fold in the fabric of reality itself. Where it exists, space becomes confused and uncertain. I see angles that lead to nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. I see depths that should not fit within the dimensions of this small room, as if the room itself extends in directions that have no names in human language. The other brothers cannot see these things. They look at me with concern and talk of fevered delusions. But I am not feverish. I am seeing something real that human eyes were never meant to perceive. The entries continued through late April and early May of 1347. Augustin stopped writing about the plague entirely. His entire focus narrowed to documenting what he was experiencing, what he was learning from this entity that shared his consciousness. It is not trying to take my soul, that is what I must stress. The concept of souls seems foreign to it, irrelevant to its purpose. What it wants, what it desperately needs, is to make me understand a warning. Our world and its world are not separate the way we imagine heaven and earth to be separate. They are layered, coexistent, occupying the same space but offset in dimensions we cannot perceive. And that offset is narrowing. The pages are pressing together, and when they finally touch fully, when our dimension and theirs occupy exactly the same space. The sentence ended there, unfinished, as if Augustin couldn't or wouldn't complete the thought. His final entry was dated May 7th, 1347. I see them everywhere now, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. They press against the membrane between our worlds like faces pressing against a veil from the other side, distorting the fabric but not quite breaking through. Each one is trying so desperately to reach through to our world, but the effort costs them something terrible. I watched one attempt to enter our reality fully this morning. It lasted only moments before it began to dissolve, to break apart, as if our three-dimensional space was incompatible with whatever higher dimensional structure its body requires. It was in agony, and yet another immediately tried to take its place. They are burning themselves away trying to communicate with us, sacrificing themselves in an attempt to deliver their warning. Why would demons do this? Why would creatures of evil destroy themselves trying to save humanity? They wouldn't. Unless everything we believe about demons is wrong. Unless they are not demons at all. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Below Augustin's final entry, in a different hand and different ink, someone had added a note in Latin. I had to dig out my phone and use the translation app offline feature to make sure I was reading it correctly. Brother Augustin Valois died May 8th, 1347. He was found in his cell showing no signs of plague or injury. No cause of death could be determined. His brothers report that in his final days he seemed almost peaceful, claiming he could see something beautiful in the space beyond our sight. May God have mercy on his soul. I checked my watch, shocked to discover it was past midnight. I'd been reading for over 9 hours without realizing it. My back ached from hunching over the journal. My eyes burned from the strain of reading medieval script by lamplight. But I couldn't stop now. Over the next 2 weeks I felt into a routine. I'd arrive at the sealed room early each morning, often before dawn. Torrente would let me in, bring me coffee and bread, then leave me alone with the journals. I'd read until the light faded, and my eyes gave out, sometimes 12 or 14 hours at a stretch. I stopped answering emails from my department. I barely ate. I couldn't think about anything except the pattern that was emerging from these pages, because there was a pattern, an undeniable, terrifying pattern. In 1589, Sister Teresa Domenico of Siena wrote about her experiences in a Carmelite convent. Unlike Augustine's poetic descriptions, Teresa wrote in a more practical, observational style. She'd been the convent's record keeper, trained to document everything precisely. I began seeing the chapel differently in March of this year. At first, I thought my eyes were failing. The altar seemed to extend beyond the wall behind it, not as if the wall was invisible, but as if the altar reached into spaces the wall didn't occupy. I could see these spaces. They were as real as the chapel itself, fully formed and present, simply existing in directions I have no words to describe. Not up or down, not left or right, not forward or back. Other directions, impossible directions. She provided detailed observations that read like scientific notes. The phenomena occurred most frequently at dawn and dusk. They were more pronounced during prayer and meditation. Other sisters in the convent saw nothing unusual, but Teresa documented everything with bureaucratic precision. Then in June, she made contact with what she called an inhabitant of the extended spaces. It does not have a body in the way we understand bodies. I see only portions of it, cross-sections, the way a two-dimensional drawing might show only a slice of a three-dimensional object. But what I see suggests something vast and complex and utterly foreign to human experience. It tried to communicate with me, not through words or images, but through direct transmission of understanding. And what it tried to make me understand fills me with a dread I cannot fully articulate. Our world is not the only world. There are others layered atop ours, like pages in a book. These entities exist in one such layer. They are as physical and real as we are, simply existing in more dimensions than we can perceive. And our layers are shifting, moving closer together, preparing to merge. When they do, both worlds will be forced to occupy the same space, and most humans will not survive the transition. I found myself making notes that would have gotten me laughed out of any academic conference, but the evidence was mounting. Journal after journal, century after century, all describing the same impossible things. Wilhelm Becker's journal from 1702 was particularly striking because Wilhelm had been a merchant, a practical-minded businessman with no religious training or mystical inclinations. His entries began with confusion and skepticism. This is madness, and I know it, yet I must document what I am experiencing before the madness consumes me entirely. For 3 weeks now I've been seeing things in my warehouse that cannot be there. Extra rooms between the rooms, corridors that connect to nowhere, spaces that fold in on themselves in ways that make my head ache to perceive. I have consulted physicians who find nothing wrong with my eyes or my mind. I have consulted priests who suggest demons, but this does not feel like the demon possession described in scripture. If anything, it feels like clarity, like seeing reality as it truly is for the first time, and discovering that reality is far stranger than we ever imagined. Wilhelm documented his experiences with a merchant's eye for detail, keeping careful records of when and where the phenomena occurred, what seemed to trigger them, how long they lasted. By November of 1702, he'd made detailed contact with one of the entities. I can now state with certainty that what I am perceiving is not madness or spiritual corruption. These beings are real. They exist in our space, but offset in higher dimensions. If I may attempt an analogy, imagine a two-dimensional being capable of perceiving only length and width, suddenly becoming aware of height. That is what is happening to me. I'm perceiving dimensions of space that humans are not meant to see. And in those dimensions, there is an entire civilization living their lives parallel to ours. They have tried to explain to me what is happening. Our dimension and theirs have always existed separately, like two books sitting side by side on a shelf. But something is wrong with the fundamental structure of space itself. The books are being pushed together. Soon they will occupy the same position, and when they do, the contents of both books will try to exist in the same space simultaneously. The results will be catastrophic. Wilhelm's final entry was dated January 3rd, 1703. I can no longer function in normal society. I see too much, too constantly. The warehouse has 1,000 rooms I cannot explain to my employees. The streets of Hamburg extend into infinite directions, and the entities are everywhere, desperately trying to communicate with anyone who can perceive them. They are not evil. They are terrified. They know what's coming. They have been trying to warn us for centuries, and we have been killing them for their efforts, calling them demons and casting them out, when all they wanted was to help us prepare. Below this, another note in different handwriting. Wilhelm Becker was found in the Elbe River, January 5th, 1703. Authorities ruled it suicide by drowning. But it was Father Pietro Russo's journal from 1823 that made me have to leave the sealed room, walk through the Vatican's gardens for 2 hours, and seriously question whether I should continue reading. Russo had been a Vatican-sanctioned exorcist, officially appointed by his bishop, trained in Rome in the proper rituals. His journal began as an official church record, documenting his cases with bureaucratic precision. Case number, date, location, name of the afflicted, symptoms observed, prayers employed, outcome achieved. 47 cases over 12 years, all following the same pattern. Demonic possession identified, ritual of exorcism performed, demon cast out, afflicted person freed, except they weren't freed, were they? Case 38, dated March 15th, 1823, was where everything changed for Russo. The afflicted was a 16-year-old girl from a wealthy Florence family. The symptoms were textbook, speaking in unknown languages, violent aversion to holy objects, displays of unnatural strength, knowledge of hidden things. Russo had performed the ritual many times before. He knew exactly what to expect. I began the exorcism at first light, Russo wrote. The girl was restrained in her bed, her family praying in the adjoining room. For 3 hours I recited the prayers, commanded the demon to reveal itself, to state its name and purpose. The girl thrashed and screamed, hurled blasphemies at me in Latin and Greek and languages I did not recognize. Her voice alternated between her own and something deeper, more guttural. All classic signs of genuine possession, not mere illness or deception. Then, at approximately 9 a.m, something unprecedented occurred. The girl suddenly became completely still and silent. The thrashing ceased. The violent contortions of her face relaxed. She looked at me with her own eyes, clear and lucid and infinitely sad. And in her own voice, calm and rational, she said, "Father, I need you to listen very carefully. The thing you are calling a demon, the thing you are trying to cast out, it is not what you think. It is not evil. It is someone, a consciousness, a person from somewhere else, and it is just as terrified as I am." I read that paragraph 3 times. I was shaken, but continued the ritual. Russo continued. The church's teachings are clear. Demons lie, demons deceive. They will say anything to avoid exorcism. I could not allow myself to be manipulated. I commanded the demon to depart, invoked the protection of Christ and the Virgin, and completed the ritual. Within another hour, the entity had departed. The girl seemed freed, peaceful. Her family wept with gratitude. She died 3 days later, March the 18th, 1823. I was called to the house to perform last rites. The physicians could find no cause, no illness, no injury. She simply stopped breathing during the night. She was 16 years old. The journal entries that followed documented Russo's deterioration over the next 8 months. He began experiencing the same symptoms as those he'd exorcised, waking at odd hours with severe vertigo, seeing spaces that shouldn't exist, hearing a voice that spoke not in words but in direct transmission of meaning. And gradually, horribly, he came to understand what he'd done. June 12th, 1823. I can no longer deny what is happening to me. I'm experiencing the same phenomena I witnessed in those I called possessed. I see more than 3 dimensions now. I perceive spaces folded into spaces, rooms within rooms, directions that have no names, and I am in communication with one of them, an entity from these higher dimensions. It is patient with me. It understands that I am frightened. It waits for me to adjust, to accept, to learn. July 30th, 1823. It has shown me what I did to the girl in Florence, what I have done to all of them, all 47 cases. They were not possessed by demons, trying to steal souls or spread evil. They were bridges, connection points between dimensions. The entities were not invading the human hosts. They were attempting to share consciousness with them, to create a space where both minds could coexist, where understanding could flow between dimensions. The violence, the screaming, the physical trauma, these were not attacks. They were the agonizing symptoms of 2 incompatible consciousness structures trying to merge. And exorcism does not send the entities back to where they came from. It kills them. The ritual disrupts the bridge, severs the connection catastrophically. The entity is not cast out. It is destroyed, torn apart by the violent separation. I have murdered 47 beings who were trying to save us. Rousseau's final entry was dated November 3rd, 1823. His handwriting had deteriorated into something barely legible, the careful script of an educated priest reduced to desperate scrawling. I understand now why they keep trying, why they endure the agony of forcing themselves into our 3-dimensional reality, compressing their higher dimensional forms into shapes that cause them unbearable pain. Why they sacrifice themselves over and over, despite knowing we will probably kill them. Because the collision is coming. Our dimension and theirs are on a course toward complete merger. Within a few centuries at most, the barriers will collapse entirely. And when that happens, when 5-dimensional reality becomes inescapable, 99% of humanity will go mad or die from the sensory overload. Unless we learn to perceive the higher dimensions gradually, unless we train ourselves to expand our consciousness before the merger, we are doomed. They have been trying to create teachers, bridge humans who can perceive both dimensions, who can help others learn, who can translate between worlds when the collision comes. Every possession is an attempted lesson. Every possessed person was meant to be a teacher, and I killed them. I killed the teachers we needed. I killed the only hope we had. May God forgive me. I cannot forgive myself. Below this, in different handwriting, Father Pietro Rousseau was found in his chambers, November 4th, 1823. He had taken his own life. May his troubled soul find peace. I sat in that cold stone room with tears streaming down my face, and I couldn't have explained why I was crying. For Rousseau, for the girl in Florence, for the entities burning themselves away trying to help us, for humanity's ignorance, all of it maybe. When Torrente came to check on me that evening, he took one look at my face and nodded slowly. "You read the Rousseau journal?" "How many?" I asked, my voice rough. "How many people like that girl in Florence have been killed by exorcisms?" "We have records going back to the 3rd century, Torrente said quietly. "Thousands upon thousands of documented cases, and those are only the official church records. The actual number across all cultures, all religions, is unknowable." I needed air. I needed to think. But Torrente stopped me at the door. "There is more, Dr. Ashford. The pattern you are seeing, it accelerates in the modern era. The 20th and 21st centuries bring more detailed accounts, more scientific observation, and they all point to the same terrifying conclusion." He paused. You have read journals from the 14th, 16th, 17th and 19th centuries. You need to read what Lieutenant Edmund Hayes documented in 1916. Because Hayes received information about a timeline, and that timeline becomes very relevant very soon. I stayed. Lieutenant Edmund Hayes's journal was different from all the others. Hayes had been an officer in the British Army, wounded at the Battle of the Somme and evacuated to a military hospital in Surrey. Unlike the religious figures and civilians whose journals I'd been reading, Hayes approached his experiences with military precision. His entries read like reconnaissance reports, clinical observations, documented for future analysis. Monday, August 14th, 1916, 2:47 a.m. Woke from troubled sleep, immediately noticed spatial anomalies in hospital room. Room appears to contain more volume than exterior dimensions should allow. Can perceive what appear to be additional spatial dimensions beyond standard 3. Phenomenon lasted approximately 20 minutes before gradually fading. Mental clarity maintained throughout. No signs of fever or delirium. Recommend further observation. Tuesday, August 15th, 1916, 2:47 a.m. Phenomenon repeated at exact same time. Spatial anomalies more pronounced. Can now see distinctly into what appear to be perpendicular dimensions. Not parallel universes, but additional directions of space occupying same location as hospital room. Observed movement in these spaces. Possible inhabitants request medical evaluation to rule out neurological damage from combat trauma. Wednesday, August 16th, 1916. Medical evaluation completed. No neurological abnormalities detected. Physician suggests combat stress. Recommends rest and observation. Spatial phenomena continue nightly at 2:47 a.m. with increasing clarity and duration. Can now observe what appears to be architecture in perpendicular dimensions. Buildings or structures analogous to buildings, existing in more than 3 spatial dimensions simultaneously. Over the following weeks, Hayes documented his experiences with remarkable detail. He sketched what he saw, trying to represent 5-dimensional structures in 2-dimensional drawings, annotating them with notes about angles and perspectives that shouldn't exist. He kept precise records of timing, duration, intensity, and gradually he made contact. September 3rd, 1916. First direct communication attempt from inhabitant of perpendicular dimensions. Communication method bypasses language entirely. Information appears directly in consciousness as pure understanding, similar to memory but clearly originating from external source. Entity appears to recognize that I can perceive its dimension and is attempting systematic contact. September 5th, 1916. Multiple communication sessions over past 48 hours. Entity demonstrates patience and apparent concern for my well-being. Does not attempt to force information but allows me to adjust to expanded perception gradually. Have begun to understand basic structure of their reality. They exist in our same physical space but offset in 2 additional spatial dimensions beyond our standard 3. Not a parallel universe, same universe, more dimensions. Hayes's entries became increasingly technical, filled with attempts to describe geometries and spatial relationships that human language wasn't designed to handle. But what made my blood run cold was his entry from September 18th, 1916. Entity has provided critical information regarding dimensional structure and relationship between our respective realities. Information arrives not as words or pictures, but as direct knowledge, the way one might know that fire is hot, without needing explanation. I will attempt to translate this knowledge into language, though language is wholly inadequate. Our 3-dimensional space and their 5-dimensional space are not separate in the way most people imagine separate realms or dimensions. They are more accurately described as layers, sheets, or membranes existing simultaneously, but normally incapable of interaction. The analogy of papers stacked in a pile is crude but serviceable. Each paper represents a dimensional layer. Most of the time, the papers remain separate, distinct, non-interacting. However, the papers are not static. They move, they flex. They oscillate based on cosmological processes, operating on scales of millions of years. Periodically, the papers press together, allowing brief contact between dimensions. This is what we are experiencing now, a thinning, the dimensional membranes pressing closer together, making perception and interaction possible for the first time in millennia. But this thinning period is different from previous cycles. The entity communicated this with undeniable certainty, and what I can only describe as existential dread. Something is wrong with the fundamental cosmic structure. The membranes are not just oscillating naturally. They are being drawn together by an anomaly, an irregularity in space-time itself. The thinning is accelerating beyond normal parameters. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking too badly to turn the page. I forced myself to breathe, to focus, to continue. September 22nd, 1916. Entity has provided timeline information. I hesitate to document this because the implications are almost too terrible to contemplate, but I must record what I have been told. The dimensional barriers are not merely thinning, they are collapsing. The process began slowly but is now accelerating exponentially. Based on the information provided and translating their temporal concepts into human terms as accurately as possible, I estimate the following timeline. The barriers will continue to degrade over the next 100 to 150 years. Contact events, what we call possession, will increase in frequency. More humans will begin to perceive the higher dimensions spontaneously. This is already happening, though most cases are dismissed as mental illness. Within approximately 100 years, the rate of contact will reach critical levels, multiple cases per day, globally. The phenomenon will become undeniable even to skeptics. Within 150 years maximum, the barriers will collapse entirely. Our three-dimensional space and their five-dimensional space will merge completely, occupying the same location simultaneously. All humans will suddenly perceive five-dimensional reality whether they are prepared or not. Entity communicates that for consciousness structures not gradually acclimated to expanded perception, the sudden awareness of two additional spatial dimensions will be psychologically and neurologically catastrophic. Estimated survival rate among unprepared human population, less than 1%. I did the math 3 times to make sure I wasn't making an error. Hayes had written this in 1916. Add 100 years and you get 2016. Add 150 years and you get 2066. We were sitting in 2024, right in the middle of Hayes's predicted critical period. The entities have been attempting to warn us for centuries, Hayes continued. Every instance of what we call demonic possession has been an attempt to create bridge consciousness, humans capable of perceiving both three-dimensional and five-dimensional reality simultaneously. These bridge humans were meant to become teachers, guides who could help others expand their perception gradually before the forced expansion of the final collision. But we've been killing them. Every exorcism destroys a potential teacher and kills the entity attempting to create that bridge. The entities sacrifice themselves to make these attempts, knowing they will probably be killed. They endure the agony of compressing themselves into incompatible dimensional structures because they hope that eventually enough humans will learn to perceive their dimension, that some portion of both species might survive the merger. Hayes's final entry was dated September 25th, 1916. I have requested discharge from hospital. They believe I am recovered enough to return to light duty. I am not recovered. I will never be recovered. I see five-dimensional reality constantly now. Cannot unsee it. My fellow soldiers, the hospital, all of London, extends in directions they cannot perceive. I see the entities everywhere. going about their lives in perpendicular dimensions, and I see their fear. They know the collision is accelerating, they know time is running out, and they know we are not listening. If this journal is ever found and read by someone capable of understanding, please know this. They are not demons. They are not evil. They are beings as real and physical as we are, simply existing in more dimensions. And they are trying to save us. We have perhaps 100 to 150 years to prepare humanity for expanded dimensional awareness. If we fail, if we continue to kill the bridge builders and ignore the warnings, then, when the barriers finally collapse, it will be the end of both our civilizations. They showed me what the final collision will look like. I pray to God I am dead before that day comes. Below this, a note in different handwriting. Lieutenant Edmund Hayes was killed in action, October 12, 1916, during the final weeks of the Somme offensive. His personal effects were returned to his family. I closed the journal and sat in the dark for a long time. The oil lamp had burned down to nothing. The only light came from my laptop screen and the grey dawn seeping through the high window. Torrente returned at sunrise with coffee and bread. He didn't speak, just set them down and waited. Hayes wrote this in 1916, I finally said. According to his timeline, we're living through the critical acceleration period right now. The period where contact events become too frequent to ignore. Yes. And you said earlier that the Vatican's documented cases have increased from 1 per year in 1950 to multiple per day now. 4 per day on average in 2024, Torrente confirmed. Over 1,400 cases so far this year through official church channels. The actual number is certainly much higher. Most cases are never reported, or they're diagnosed as mental illness and treated with medication, rather than religious intervention. I picked up the coffee with shaking hands. Why are you showing me this? What do you want me to do with this information? Torrente sat down across from me. The church cannot officially acknowledge any of this. To do so would be to admit that 2,000 years of doctrine about demons and possession has been fundamentally wrong. That we have been committing murder in the name of God. That our most sacred rituals have been killing the beings trying to save us. Can you imagine the crisis of faith that would cause? The lawsuits, the scandals, the institutional collapse. So, you'd rather let humanity be unprepared when the dimensional collision happens? No, Torrente said firmly. That is why I contacted you. The church cannot tell this truth, but you can. You are a respected academic, a published scholar. If you document these journals, publish your findings, some will dismiss you as mad, but others will listen. And those who listen will begin to experience the contact themselves. Their consciousness will begin to expand. They will become the bridge generation Hayes wrote about, the teachers and guides we will need when 5-dimensional reality becomes inescapable. I'll be destroyed professionally, laughed out of academia, probably lose my position at the university. Yes, Torrente agreed without hesitation, almost certainly. But you asked me what I want you to do. I want you to decide whether your professional reputation is more important than the survival of human consciousness itself. He stood and moved towards the door. There are more journals, he said, modern ones, from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. More detailed, more scientific, documenting the acceleration Hayes predicted. I think you need to read them before you make your decision. Particularly Dr. Helena Kovach's journal from 2021. And after that there is one more thing I must show you. But first, read the modern accounts. He left me alone again with the journals and my spiralling thoughts. Over the next week, I worked through the modern accounts. The 20th century brought a shift in tone. The writers were more likely to have scientific training, more likely to document their experiences with clinical precision. But they all describe the same phenomena, and they all reach the same terrible conclusion. Dr. Helena Kovach's journal from 2021 was particularly devastating because she'd been a physicist, trained to think rigorously about reality and perception. When she started experiencing spatial anomalies in March 2021, her first instinct was to seek medical evaluation and document everything with scientific precision. Monday, March 1st, 2021, 3:47 a.m. Woke with severe vertigo and spatial disorientation. Bedroom appears to contain additional spatial volumes not present during normal perception. Anomaly lasted approximately 15 minutes. Scheduling neurological consultation to rule out tumor or other structural abnormalities. Documenting all episodes for medical review. Within a week, she'd had multiple MRI scans, inner ear testing, and psychiatric evaluation. Everything came back normal, and the phenomena continued, growing stronger and more frequent. Friday, March 12th, 2021. Neurological testing reveals no abnormalities. Psychiatrist suggests possible dissociative episodes. Prescribes medication. I'm not convinced this is psychological. The spatial anomalies have consistent structure and geometry. They are not random or chaotic. They appear to be real spaces, existing in dimensions perpendicular to our standard 3. Can perceive these spaces during episodes with increasing clarity. This is not hallucination. This is perception of something actually present. By April, Helena had made contact with an entity and was attempting to understand its communication through the lens of her physics training. The entity does not speak in language. It transmits pure information directly into my consciousness. Complex concepts appear fully formed, as if I had always known them. It has been showing me the structure of its dimensional space. I'm attempting to model this mathematically, though the math required is beyond standard physics. This appears to be genuine higher dimensional geometry, not metaphorical or spiritual, but literally additional spatial dimensions orthogonal to our 3. Helena's journal included hand-drawn diagrams and mathematical notations. I photographed every page, planning to show them to colleagues in the physics department, knowing even as I did so that I'd probably never be able to explain where I got them. Her entries through May and June documented her growing ability to perceive 5-dimensional space and her growing horror at what she was learning. June 2nd, 2021. I finally understand what they have been trying to tell us, what every possession case in history has really been about. Our dimension and theirs are not separate in any meaningful sense. They are layers of the same reality, differentiated only by the number of spatial dimensions each occupies. We exist in 3 spatial dimensions. They exist in 5. Both layers occupy the same location, the same universe, just offset in dimensional directions we cannot normally perceive. But the offset is narrowing. The dimensional membranes are being drawn together by what appears to be a large-scale anomaly in space-time geometry. I don't understand the mechanism, but the entities have shown me the results. Within decades, perhaps as few as 10 or 20 years, the membranes will merge completely. Our 3-dimensional space and their 5-dimensional space will attempt to occupy exactly the same location simultaneously. But consciousness structure is not prepared for this merger. The results will be catastrophic. Imagine a 2-dimensional being suddenly becoming aware of height and depth. Every object would appear to extend in impossible directions. Every space would contain hidden volumes. The sensory input would be overwhelming, incomprehensible, maddening. Now imagine that happening to billions of humans simultaneously. That is what the entities have been trying to warn us about. Every possession has been an attempt to create bridge consciousness, humans who can perceive both dimensional spaces and help others learn. The entities volunteer for this. They compress their 5-dimensional bodies into our 3-dimensional space, a process that causes them unimaginable agony, like forcing a three-dimensional person to exist in only two dimensions. Parts of them are cut away, compressed, distorted, and when we perform exorcisms, when we force them out violently, we don't send them home. We kill them. We have been killing our would-be saviors for thousands of years. Helena's later entries showed her deteriorating mental state as her perception became permanently expanded. June 10th, 2021. Cannot turn off the expanded perception anymore. See five-dimensional reality constantly. My apartment has rooms in directions that don't exist. The university extends infinitely in perpendicular dimensions. I walk through spaces my colleagues cannot see. They are worried about me. I am worried about me. June 13th, 2021. The sensory overload is unbearable. Human consciousness was not designed to process five-dimensional sensory input continuously. I cannot eat, cannot sleep, cannot exist in three dimensions anymore without seeing all the others simultaneously. Every object has hidden volumes. Every person extends in directions they don't know they occupy. And the entities are everywhere. Thousands of them, all desperately trying to reach through. All trying to find someone who will listen and teach others before it's too late. Her final entry was brief and heartbreaking. June 15th, 2021. Cannot continue like this, going to the sea tonight. Water exists in fewer dimensions than solid matter, less complex geometry to perceive. Maybe in the water, I will finally see less. Maybe there I will find peace, not suicide. Just need to stop seeing. Need it to stop. Monsignor Torrente's note was paperclipped to the final page. Dr. Helena Kovac's body was recovered from the Adriatic Sea on June 16th, 2021. She was 34 years old. Autopsy showed no drugs or alcohol in her system, no signs of mental illness. She walked into the water of her own accord and did not return. May she find the peace she sought. I closed Helena's journal and realized I was crying again. This brilliant woman, trained in physics and mathematics, driven mad by seeing too much reality too soon. And according to Hayes' timeline, Helena's fate would become commonplace within a few decades when the barriers collapsed completely and everyone saw five-dimensional reality whether they were ready or not. I needed air. I needed to process what I was learning. But more than anything, I needed to know if what I was reading was actually real, or if I was being drawn into some elaborate delusion. That night, back in my hotel room, I woke at exactly 3:47 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the power of suggestion, my subconscious responding to all the journal entries mentioning that specific time. But then I noticed the corner of my room by the window. It looked wrong. Not blurry or distorted, but wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like it extended further than it should, contained more space than the visible dimensions allowed for. I got out of bed and walked toward the corner, and as I approached, the wrongness increased. I could see into it, into spaces that shouldn't exist within my hotel room. Extra depth, extra volume, directions that had no names. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes just staring, before the phenomenon gradually faded and the corner looked normal again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I found Torrente in the Vatican Library's main reading room. He took one look at my face and said, "It has begun for you. You are starting to perceive the higher dimensions." "Is this real?" I demanded. "Or have I been reading these journals so long that I've talked myself into experiencing delusions?" "Does it matter?" Torrente asked quietly. "If what you are perceiving feels real, is documented across centuries by hundreds of independent observers, and follows predictable patterns, then by any meaningful definition, it is real. Whether it fits within current scientific paradigms is a separate question." "How long have you been experiencing this?" 7 years, since I first began cataloguing this collection. and reading Father Amorth's personal notes. Torrente gestured for me to follow him. Come. There is one more thing you must see before you make your decision about what to do with this knowledge. He led me, not back to the sealed room with the ancient journals, but to a different section of the library, a modern office with computers and filing cabinets. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a contemporary notebook, the kind you could buy at any stationery store. This arrived 6 months ago, Torrente said, placing it on the desk, from Munich, Germany. The writer is 14 years old. Her name is Isabella Dietrich. I opened the notebook. The handwriting was neat but youthful, decorated here and there with small doodles in the margins. Sunday, February 11th, 2024. Okay, so this is going to sound completely crazy, but Mum said I should start writing down what's happening to me, because the doctors can't figure it out, and maybe keeping a journal will help. All the brain scans came back totally normal. They did like 5 different tests. My brain is fine. But I know what I'm seeing is real, even though nobody believes me. The early entries had a teenager's voice, self-conscious and uncertain. Isabella described seeing another place, overlapping with normal reality, beings that look weird but not in a scary way, just different, and her parents' growing concern that she was having some kind of breakdown. Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. Mum and Dad are really freaking out. They keep asking if I'm using drugs, which is honestly kind of insulting, because when would I even have time for drugs with all my homework and piano lessons? But I get why they're scared. If someone told me they could see invisible people living in invisible rooms, I'd probably freak out too. But it's real. I can see them, and they can see me seeing them, which is actually kind of cool in a weird way. But as the weeks progressed, Isabella's descriptions became more confident and detailed. Saturday, March 9th, 2024. I figured out how to control it. Sort of. Like, I can make the other place appear more clearly, or make it fade into the background. It's like learning to focus your eyes, or like when you look at those magic eye pictures and suddenly the 3D image pops out. Once you know the trick, you can do it on purpose. The beings from the other place are actually really nice. One of them has been trying to talk to me. Not with words, obviously, because they don't have mouths, at least not ones I can see. It's more like they think something really loudly, and then I just know what they meant. Does that make sense? Probably not. But it works. Anyway, this one being keeps showing me pictures in my head of 2 things crashing together, like it's trying to warn me about something. I wish I understood better. I've been trying to draw what I see, so maybe that will help. The journal was filled with drawings. I spread them across the desk, marveling at the detail. Buildings that extended in impossible directions, each one carefully labelled with notes. This is like their version of an apartment building, but it has rooms in directions that don't exist here. Beings that seem to have too many angles, too many surfaces, sketched from multiple perspectives simultaneously. This is what they look like from the front, but also from above, and from the side all at once, because they exist in more directions than we do. And everywhere, scattered throughout, were these notes of innocent wonder that broke my heart. They have families just like we do. I saw one with what I think were kids playing some kind of game. It's actually really beautiful if you can get past how weird it looks. In May, Isabella mentioned finding others online. Saturday, May 18th, 2024. Oh my god, I'm not the only one. I found this forum where people are talking about seeing exactly what I'm seeing. Most of them are around my age, like teenagers and early 20s. There's this girl in Japan who can actually walk into the other place fully, like her body moves through the extra dimensions. She's been teaching others how to do it. And there's a guy in Brazil who's been seeing them since he was like 10 years old. He says there's maybe 100 of us around the world, probably more who just haven't found the forums yet. We're teaching each other, sharing techniques for how to see more clearly, how to control it, how to not get overwhelmed. It's so much easier when you have other people who understand and don't think you're crazy. And here's the really cool part. We're all teenagers or early 20s. The adult brains seem to have a much harder time adapting to seeing the extra dimensions. But our brains are still developing, still flexible enough to handle it, like how little kids can learn languages easier than adults. By June, Isabella had developed a remarkably sophisticated understanding of what was happening. Thursday, June 13th, 2024. Okay, so I think I finally get it. Our world and their world are like two pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. Usually the papers are separated by a little bit of space so they don't touch and we can't see each other. But the space between the papers is shrinking. They're getting pushed together and eventually they're going to touch completely and merge into one piece of paper. When that happens, everyone is going to suddenly see what I'm seeing, and most people are going to completely lose it because their brains won't be able to handle seeing in 5 dimensions all at once. It'll be like if someone who'd been blind their whole life suddenly got sight, but times 1,000. Too much information, too much sensory input. Their minds will just break. That's why the beings from the other place keep trying to possess people. I know now that they're not actually possessing anyone. They're trying to teach people how to see their dimension gradually, carefully, so that when the big merge happens, there will be some humans who can handle it and help the others adjust. But most people think they're demons and try to cast them out, which kills them. The beings know they'll probably die, but they keep trying anyway because they're hoping enough people will learn before it's too late. That's really sad, but also really brave. They've been dying to save us for hundreds of years, and we just keep killing them. Her most recent entry was dated October 20th, 2024, less than 3 weeks ago. Had a session with Dr. Werner today. She's my psychologist. She's been working with me since March. She doesn't think I'm crazy anymore, which is a huge relief. She's actually starting to see it too. After I taught her some of the focusing exercises, she can see the other place for a few seconds now. Her mind is kind of blown. It's pretty funny, watching an adult realize that everything they thought they knew about reality is wrong. She thinks we have maybe 10 to 20 years before the big merge happens. That's based on me describing how much stronger and more frequent the contact is getting. 10 to 20 years doesn't seem like enough time to teach billions of people how to see in 5 dimensions, but Dr. Werner says we have to try anyway. Even if we can only help a few million people, that's a few million who might survive. I've been making videos for the forums, teaching the techniques that work for me, and other people are making videos teaching their techniques. It's spreading faster now. There are maybe 500 people worldwide who can see clearly and aren't freaked out by it. Most of them are teenagers like me. We call ourselves the bridge generation, because we're the bridge between the 3-dimension world and the 5-dimension world. Some of the adults think we're starting some kind of cult or something, but we're literally just trying to help people not die when reality suddenly gets bigger. I don't know what else we're supposed to do. I looked up at Torrente. You're in contact with her? Through her parents, yes. They are Catholic, they came to the church for help. And somehow the case was referred to me. I've been corresponding with Isabella and her psychologist for several months now. I arranged for you to speak with her today, if you are interested. She's going to talk to me. She's very eager to share what she has learned. She believes correctly, I think, that the more people who understand what is happening, the better our chances of surviving the final collision. She's quite remarkable for her age. Torrente checked his watch. The video call is scheduled for 3 o'clock. You have 2 hours to prepare whatever questions you wish to ask. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I sat in a small Vatican office with my laptop open, my hands sweating, my heart racing. When the video call connected and Isabella's face appeared on screen, I was struck by how utterly normal she looked. She was 14 years old, still had braces, sitting in a bedroom decorated with posters of bands I'd never heard of and strings of fairy lights around the window. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing an oversized hoodie. She could have been any teenager anywhere, except for her eyes. There was something about the way she looked at the camera, the way her gaze seemed to focus on points slightly off-center from where I actually was, as if she was seeing me from multiple angles simultaneously. "Dr. Ashford, hi." Her enthusiasm was immediately infectious. "Monsignor Torrente told me all about you and your research on Annalisa Michel. That's so cool that you figured out she was trying to tell them something. Most people just think she was crazy or the priests were evil, but you understood that something else was happening." "Thank you, Isabella. I've read your journal. It's remarkable. How are you feeling? How are your parents handling all this?" "Oh, they're doing way better now that Dr. Werner explained it to them. At first, they thought I was having like a complete mental breakdown, which, I mean, fair. It does kind of sound insane. But once Dr. Werner started experiencing it herself, that really helped. Like, now there's an adult who can back me up and say, this is real. And you're experiencing this constantly now, the expanded perception." "Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I can sort of dial it down if I need to focus on normal stuff like during school or whatever, but it's always there in the background. The other dimensions, the beings from the other place, all of it. It's kind of like, you know, when you're in a crowded room and there's music playing, but you're focused on a conversation, so the music fades into the background, but it's still there. It's like that. And you're teaching others how to perceive what you're perceiving. Trying to, yeah. It's hard because everyone's brain works a little differently. What works for me might not work for someone else, but there are patterns. Like, meditation helps a lot. Anything that quiets down the normal three-dimension sensory input makes it easier to perceive the other dimensions. And there are these focusing exercises, kind of like those magic eye pictures I mentioned in my journal, where you learn to shift your perception to see things that are technically always there, but your brain usually filters out. She pulled out a sketchbook and held up a drawing. "Okay, so see this? This is like a basic 5-dimensional structure. Obviously, I can't actually draw 5 dimensions on flat paper, but I'm showing different cross-sections. You see how the angles don't quite make sense in normal geometry? That's because some of these angles exist in directions we don't have words for." For the next 40 minutes, Isabella walked me through concepts that should have been incomprehensible. She explained 5-dimensional space with the casual confidence of someone explaining how to ride a bike. And somehow, impossibly, I found myself understanding things I shouldn't have been able to grasp. As she spoke, as she showed me her drawings and diagrams, something was shifting in my perception, like she was teaching my brain a new way of seeing. "The beings from the other place are really worried," Isabella said, her tone becoming more serious. "They know the collision is accelerating faster than they thought it would. They've been trying to create bridge humans, people who can see both dimensions, for hundreds of years. But we keep killing them, calling them demons and casting them out, when really they're trying to help us." "Your journal mentioned a timeline, 10 to 20 years before the full merger." "Yeah, I mean, the beings don't experience time exactly the way we do, because they've got more dimensions to move through, so it's not like they gave me an exact date circled on a calendar, but based on how quickly the contact is increasing, how much stronger the connection between dimensions is getting, Dr. Werner thinks we've got maybe 2 decades maximum, could be less." "And what happens when the merger occurs? What will it look like?" Isabella's expression became somber in a way that seemed far too mature for 14. "It's going to be really, really bad for most people, like catastrophically bad. Imagine spending your whole life in a room where you can only see forward, backward, left, right, up and down. Those are the only directions you know, and then suddenly, boom, 2 entirely new directions of space appear. Directions you don't have words for, directions your brain was never designed to process. Everything you can see suddenly extends in ways that are impossible but also completely real." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your mind will try to process it. It'll try to make sense of what you're seeing. But it can't because you don't have the framework. It's like trying to run software on hardware that isn't compatible. And for most people, their consciousness will just break. They'll see things that shouldn't exist, and their minds will fracture trying to understand. It'll look like mass psychosis. Billions of people suddenly going insane all at once. But they're not insane. They're just seeing more reality than their brains can handle. And those of you who've learned to see gradually, you'll be okay. We should be. Our brains have adapted slowly. We've built up the neural pathways to process 5-dimensional information. We can translate between the 3-dimension people and the 5-dimension beings. We can help explain what's happening, teach others how to adapt, hopefully save some people. She looked directly at the camera. That's why I'm making videos, why I'm teaching everyone I can. Even if we can only help a small percentage, that's still millions of lives. We have to try. What do you want me to do, Isabella? Why did Monsignor Torrente arrange for us to speak? Because you're a professor. You're respected. You can write papers and give lectures, and people will actually listen to you. At least some of them. If I tried to publish this stuff, everyone would just be like, "Oh, look at the delusional teenager." But you can help spread the information to people who wouldn't otherwise hear it. You can help create more bridge humans before the merger happens. I'll be professionally destroyed, called a crank, a fraud, probably lose my job. Isabella's expression was sympathetic but firm. Yeah, probably. But in 10 or 20 years, when 5-dimensional reality is unavoidable and billions of people are dying or going mad, you'll know you tried to warn them. You'll know you helped some people learn to see. And honestly, Dr. Ashford, what's more important? Your job or the survival of human civilization? It was a hell of a thing to hear from a 14-year-old kid. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I stood and found Torrente waiting in the hallway. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll document everything. The journals, my research, interviews with you and Isabella. I'll publish it. Whatever happens to my career, it doesn't matter. Not compared to this." Torrente nodded slowly, and I saw relief in his eyes. Father Amorth would be grateful, as am I. But there's one condition. You have to give me Amorth's personal notes and letters, the things he wrote in his final days. I need his first-hand account of how he came to understand what possession really was. Torrente hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, come with me." He led me to yet another restricted section, unlocking door after door, until we reached a small archive room. From a locked cabinet, he pulled out a folder of documents. These are Father Amorth's private papers, letters he wrote but never sent, personal journals from his final year. Some of them were written in the weeks after he learned of this collection's existence, after he realized the truth about what he had been doing for 30 years. Torrente handed me the folder. "Read them, and may God help us all." That night in my hotel room, I read Father Gabriele Amorth's final writings, the famous exorcist's confession. The first document was a letter dated September 2nd, 2016, addressed to Monsignor Torrente but marked not to be opened until after my death. Amorth had died 2 weeks later. "My dear Paolo, I am dying, and before I go I must tell you a truth that will shake the foundations of everything we have believed. I have been wrong, catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. For 30 years I fought demons. I performed over 160,000 exorcisms. I believed with every fibre of my being that I was doing God's work, saving souls, casting out evil. But they were not demons, Paolo. They were beings from another dimension of physical reality. Not spirits, not devils from hell, but creatures as real and material as we are, simply existing in more spatial dimensions than humans can normally perceive. And they were not possessing people to steal souls or spread corruption. They were possessing people to communicate, to warn us, to teach us, to prepare us for what is coming. The violence, the screaming, the blasphemies, the physical trauma during exorcisms, These were not attacks or signs of spiritual warfare. They were symptoms, the agonizing symptoms of a 5-dimensional consciousness being compressed into a 3-dimensional body. Imagine being forced to exist in only 2 dimensions when your body requires 3. Every movement would be torture. Every thought would be distorted. You would thrash and scream and say anything to make the pain stop. That is what possession really is. Not invasion, but compression. Not evil, but agony. And exorcism, dear God, exorcism does not send them home. It kills them. The ritual doesn't cast the entity out. It severs the connection catastrophically, violently. The entity is torn apart by the forced separation. I have murdered 160,000 beings, 160,000 entities who compressed themselves into incompatible dimensional structures, who endured unimaginable suffering, who sacrificed themselves to try to warn humanity. And I killed them. I killed our teachers. I killed our only hope. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking too badly. I forced myself to continue. You must understand why they keep trying, why they endure this torture over and over across centuries. Because our dimension and theirs are on a collision course toward complete merger. The barriers between dimensional spaces are collapsing. Within the next few decades, within our children's lifetimes, the separation will end. 3-dimensional space and 5-dimensional space will occupy the exact same location. And when that happens, every human will suddenly perceive 5-dimensional reality, whether they are prepared or not. For consciousness structures not gradually acclimated to this expanded perception, the sudden awareness will be catastrophic. 99% of humanity will either die or go permanently insane from the sensory overload. Only those who have learned to perceive the higher dimensions gradually, who have trained their minds to process 5-dimensional information, will survive. The entities have been trying to create teachers, bridge humans who can perceive both dimensional spaces, who can help others learn, who can translate between species when the collision comes. Every possession was an attempted lesson. Every possessed person was meant to become a teacher. And I killed them. I killed thousands of potential teachers over 3 decades. I helped ensure humanity's extinction. Find a way to spread this knowledge, Paolo. The Church cannot officially acknowledge our error, we both know this. But find someone outside the Church. Find someone brave enough to document the truth and publish it. Let the knowledge spread gradually, carefully. Let people begin to experience the contact, to expand their perception. Create the bridge generation we need, because time is running out. I die with this weight on my soul. I can only pray that God understands I acted in ignorance, not malice. I can only hope that someone will continue the work I should have been doing, teaching humanity to see rather than casting out those who tried to teach us. The letter was signed simply Gabriele. There were other documents in the folder. Journal entries from Amorth's final months detailing his growing ability to perceive 5-dimensional space. Sketches of entities he'd seen. Notes about conversations with the beings. Their desperate pleas for humans to understand before it was too late. One entry from August 2016 particularly struck me. I asked one of them today why they continue. Why they keep sacrificing themselves when humans kill them over and over. It showed me something, not words or pictures, but direct understanding. They continue because they know what will happen if they stop. If the merger occurs and no humans are prepared, both civilizations will be destroyed. Billions of 5-dimensional beings and billions of 3-dimensional humans, all trapped in the same space, unable to understand each other, unable to coexist. It will be mutual extinction. They are not our enemies, they never were. They are the other passengers in a cosmic accident that neither species caused but both will suffer from, and they have never stopped hoping that we could learn to understand each other, to help each other, to survive together. That kind of hope, maintained across centuries of being murdered for their efforts, is the most beautiful and most tragic thing I have ever encountered. I spent 30 years fighting them. I should have spent 30 years learning from them. I read through the entire folder twice before I could bring myself to close it. Then I opened my laptop and began to write. Over the next 3 months, I barely slept. I compiled everything. Photographs of all 23 historical journals, with detailed notes and translations. Scans of Amorth's personal papers. Transcripts of my conversations with Torrente. Video footage of my interview with Isabella. My own observations of beginning to experience expanded dimensional perception. I built a comprehensive, meticulously documented case that everything we believed about demonic possession was wrong. The manuscript grew to over 400 pages. It read like rigorous academic research but described things that should have been impossible. I cited sources, provided historical context, included testimonies from multiple independent observers across centuries. I approached it the way I'd approach any scholarly work, with one crucial difference. I was arguing that the foundations of religious demonology, psychology, and physics were all incomplete. That reality contained more than we'd believed, that consciousness could be expanded, that humanity was facing an existential crisis no one was talking about. And as I wrote, something strange started happening. I would sit down to work in the morning, and suddenly it would be evening, hours gone, with pages and pages of text written in my handwriting that I didn't remember producing. At first this terrified me, but when I read what I'd written during these fugue states, it was good, better than good. Technical, precise, using terminology I didn't consciously know, but that somehow made perfect sense. I called my friend Rachel at MIT, a theoretical physicist I'd known since graduate school. "I need you to look at something," I said, and sent her one of the sections I'd written during a fugue state. Mathematical descriptions of 5-dimensional topology, diagrammed explanations of how higher dimensional objects would appear in 3-dimensional space. She called me back 6 hours later. "Daniel, where did you get this? This is graduate-level topology, bordering on research mathematics. Some of these concepts are beyond current physics. How could you have written this?" "I don't think I did," I said quietly, "not alone. I think something is writing through me, using my hands to add information to the manuscript." There was a long silence on the phone. Then Rachel said, her voice carefully controlled, "Daniel, I think you need to see a psychiatrist. Read the full manuscript first, all 400 pages. Then call me back and tell me I'm crazy, but read it all before you decide." 3 days later, my phone rang at 3:47 in the morning. "I'm seeing it," Rachel whispered. Her voice was shaking. "I read your manuscript last night, and when I woke up an hour ago, my apartment was wrong. The walls extend further than they should. There are rooms that aren't there. Oh God, Daniel, what is this? What did you do to me?" "I opened your perception," I said. "I'm sorry. I needed someone else to verify that this is real. But you can control it with practice. You can learn to turn it on and off. Isabella teaches techniques in her videos." "Who the hell is Isabella?" "She's 14 years old and she's been living with expanded perception for almost a year. She can teach you how to manage it, how to not get overwhelmed. There's a whole online community now, several hundred people worldwide, who've learned to perceive the higher dimensions. They help each other." "This is insane." "I know, but it's also real. You're seeing it, Rachel. You're experiencing the same thing documented in journals spanning 7 centuries. You're becoming one of the bridge humans, one of the people who might actually survive when the dimensional collision happens." "When what happens, Daniel? You're scaring me." "Read the manuscript again. All of it this time, including the timeline sections. We have maybe 10 to 20 years before the barriers between dimensions collapse completely. When that happens, everyone will suddenly see what you're seeing now. And most of them will die or go insane because their brains won't be able to process it. But you're learning gradually. Your consciousness is adapting. You're going to be okay. I don't feel okay. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I know, I felt the same way at first, but it gets easier. Trust me. Find Isabella's YouTube channel, watch her videos, join the forums. There are people who can help. Rachel didn't respond for a long moment. Then she said, "If this is real, if any of this is actually happening, then you need to publish your manuscript immediately. People need to know. They need time to prepare. I'm planning to release it next month, but Rachel, you understand what this means for me, right? My career is over. The moment I publish this, I become a crank in the eyes of the academic world." Yeah, but if you don't publish it, billions of people might die. Kind of makes your career seem less important, doesn't it? I published the manuscript digitally on April 15th, 2025, making it freely available as a PDF download. I titled it Dimensional Collapse, a comprehensive analysis of historical possession, phenomena, and the coming merger of spatial realities. I put my name on it, my credentials, my institutional affiliation. I knew I was ending my career, but I did it anyway. The initial response was exactly what I'd expected. Most people dismissed it as creative fiction or the ravings of someone having a breakdown. Several colleagues from Boston University reached out with concern, asking if I was okay, suggesting I might want to take a leave of absence for my mental health. But within the first week, over 100,000 people had downloaded the manuscript, and a small but significant percentage of those readers began reporting effects. Online forums exploded with people describing the same experiences documented in the historical journals. The 3:47 a.m. wakings, the perception of extraspatial dimensions, the contact with entities from the higher dimensional space. Most dismissed these reports as mass hysteria or suggestibility, but the numbers kept growing. Within a month, over 10,000 people worldwide were claiming to have experienced genuine dimensional contact after reading the manuscript. Isabella's YouTube channel went from a few hundred subscribers to over 50,000 as people desperately sought guidance on how to manage their expanding perception. The Catholic Church issued a careful statement. The work of Dr. Daniel Ashford represents his personal research and interpretations, and does not reflect the theological positions or teachings of the Church regarding the nature of spiritual possession. The Church continues to recognize the reality of demonic influence while acknowledging that many cases previously attributed to possession may have psychological or medical explanations. But privately, Monsignor Torrente sent me an email that made everything worthwhile. "You have done what Father Amorth hoped. The knowledge is spreading. People are learning to see. May God bless your courage, and may history judge you more kindly than your contemporaries." By July 2025, 3 months after publication, I could no longer function in normal academic life. I'd been placed on indefinite leave from Boston University. Several mental health professionals had reached out offering help, concerned I was experiencing a prolonged psychotic episode. My ex-wife called, worried, saying our daughter was asking why Daddy had become one of those conspiracy people. But none of that mattered, because I could no longer turn off my expanded perception. I saw 5-dimensional reality constantly now. My apartment was a labyrinth of impossible spaces, rooms extending in directions that didn't exist, corridors leading to nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The beings were visible all the time, going about their lives in perpendicular dimensions, their 5-dimensional forms partially intersecting with our 3-dimensional space. I could see them shopping in what I can only describe as markets, though the concept of market is inadequate for spaces that exist in 5 dimensions. I could see their children playing games I couldn't understand. I could see their architecture, their technology, their entire civilization layered atop ours, like a drawing on transparent paper held over another drawing. and I could see their fear. They knew the collision was accelerating. They knew time was running out. I recorded one final video in mid-July, sitting in my living room surrounded by furniture that extended in directions the camera couldn't capture. I looked exhausted because I was exhausted. I hadn't slept more than a few hours in weeks. My eyes had trouble focusing on three-dimensional objects when I could see their five-dimensional extensions so clearly. But I needed to say this. I needed to get it on record before I was gone. "If you're watching this," I said to the camera, "you've probably downloaded my manuscript. You've probably started experiencing some of the symptoms I described. The waking at 3:47 in the morning. The sense that your home contains more space than it should. The perception of angles and depths that shouldn't be possible. And you're probably terrified because everything you thought you knew about reality is being challenged." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Don't be paralyzed by that fear. Or do be afraid. Fear is an appropriate response to discovering that reality is far stranger than we believed. But don't let that fear stop you from learning, from adapting, from expanding your consciousness to handle what you're perceiving. The beings we've called demons for 2,000 years are not demons. They're not evil. They're not spiritual entities trying to corrupt your soul. They are physical beings, as real and material as you and me, who exist in more spatial dimensions than we can normally perceive. They are not invading our world. Our world and theirs are colliding, have been colliding for millennia, and the collision is now reaching its final stages. Every possession case in history was an attempted communication. Every person who claimed to be possessed was potentially a bridge human, someone whose consciousness could span both dimensional spaces. And we killed them. We performed exorcisms and murdered the beings, trying to create these bridges. We've been killing our would-be saviors for centuries because we didn't understand what was really happening. I looked directly at the camera, trying to ignore the five-dimensional entity standing in the corner of my living room, watching me with what I'd learned to recognize as concern. Monsignor Torrente estimates we have between 10 and 20 years before the dimensional barriers collapse completely. When that happens, everyone on Earth will suddenly perceive five-dimensional reality, whether they're prepared or not. For most people, this will be psychologically catastrophic. Their minds will break trying to process sensory information. They have no framework for understanding. It will look like the apocalypse. Billions of people suddenly going insane, unable to function, unable to survive. But those of you experiencing the contact now, those of you learning to perceive the higher dimensions gradually, you're adapting. Your brains are building new neural pathways. Your consciousness is expanding to handle additional spatial dimensions. You are becoming the bridge generation that Lieutenant Hayes wrote about in 1916. You are becoming the teachers and translators we'll need when the full merger occurs. I paused, and despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. The beings from the five-dimensional space have never stopped trying to help us. After 2,000 years of being murdered by exorcists, after countless entities sacrificing themselves and dying in agony, trying to create bridges, they still haven't given up on us. They still believe humans can learn. They still hope we can survive this together, that when our dimensions finally occupy the same space, we'll have enough people who understand both realities to help facilitate coexistence rather than mutual extinction. That kind of hope, maintained across centuries of violence and misunderstanding, that kind of persistent faith in the possibility of understanding despite constant failure, that's not demonic. That's the most profoundly compassionate thing I've ever witnessed. I looked off camera for a moment, seeming to focus on something the viewer wouldn't be able to see. When I looked back, my expression had softened. Father Gabriele Amorth spent 30 years fighting what he thought were demons. He performed 160,000 exorcisms believing he was saving souls. And in his final days, he realized he'd been killing the beings trying to save us. He died carrying that weight, but he died with hope that someone would continue the work he should have been doing, teaching humanity to see rather than teaching us to cast out those who tried to help us see. Learn to see. Learn to understand. Learn to expand your consciousness before the expansion is forced upon you. Find Isabella's videos. Join the forums. Connect with others who are experiencing the same things you are. Teach each other. Support each other. Prepare. I looked directly at the camera one final time. For just a moment, the entity in the corner moved closer, and the camera's limited three-dimensional capture somehow caught an edge of it, a hint of depth and structure that shouldn't have been possible within the frame. Several people who watched the video later would swear they saw something standing behind me, something that didn't make visual sense but was undeniably present. "They're not coming," I said quietly. "They're already here. They've always been here, living their lives in dimensions perpendicular to ours. We simply couldn't see them until the barriers started thinning. And soon, very soon, everyone will be able to see them, whether they want to or not." The question isn't whether you'll be next to experience the expanded perception. The question is whether you'll learn to handle it gracefully, or whether it will destroy your mind. There's still time, not much but some. Use it wisely. I reached forward and turned off the camera. They found my body 5 days later, on July 22nd, 2025. My landlord called the police for a wellness check after I hadn't been seen for several days and wasn't answering my door or phone. The official report listed the cause of death as suicide, though the circumstances were unusual enough to generate some speculation. I was found in my bathtub, which was filled with seawater. The building was 300 miles from any ocean. No one could determine how approximately 50 gallons of seawater had gotten into a fifth-floor apartment's bathtub. The coroner ruled drowning as the cause of death, noting that my lungs were filled with salt water. But several details from the scene didn't make it into the official report. The responding officers described feeling intense vertigo in my apartment, as if the space was larger than it should be. One officer, in his statement later sealed from public record, claimed he saw rooms that shouldn't have been there, spaces that didn't match the apartment's floor plan. The crime scene photographs show odd distortions, areas where the walls seem to extend in directions that don't make sense, given the room's dimensions. And on my desk, they found a handwritten note in my handwriting that simply said, "Went to where there are fewer dimensions to perceive, like Helena, seeking peace in water's simpler geometry. Don't grieve. I finally see clearly now. Both worlds at once. It's beautiful and terrible and necessary. Continue the work. Teach them to see before it's too late." The journals remain in the Vatican Apostolic Library, still uncatalogued in their digitization project. Monsignor Paolo Torrente continues to document possession cases, which have now reached an average of 6 per day globally, up from 4 per day just 6 months earlier. The acceleration is undeniable. Isabella Dietrich is 15 years old now. Her YouTube channel has over 200,000 subscribers. The online community of people experiencing expanded dimensional perception has grown to approximately 50,000 worldwide, with new members joining daily. Isabella runs weekly video calls teaching perception techniques, meditation exercises, ways to manage the sensory overload of seeing 5-dimensional reality. She is remarkably mature for her age, thoughtful and patient with newcomers who are terrified by what they're experiencing. In a recent video, she addressed the question of what happens to people like Helena Kovac and me, people whose perception expanded too quickly and who sought escape in the water. "I think they found what they were looking for," Isabella said. "Peace, or at least a kind of simplification. Water has a less complex geometric structure than solid matter. When you're drowning, overwhelmed by 5-dimensional sensory input, immersing yourself in water might provide relief. a reduction of the dimensional complexity you have to process. I don't know if that's what Dr. Ashford and Dr. Kovac experienced, but I hope they found peace. She paused, looking directly at the camera with those eyes that see more than they should. We don't have to follow their path, though. We can learn to handle the expanded perception without it destroying us. That's what the bridge generation is for. That's what we're learning to do. And if we can figure it out, we can teach billions of others before the full collapse happens. We can save lives. Maybe we can even save both civilizations. My manuscript continues to circulate online. It's been downloaded over 5 million times now. The percentage of readers who begin experiencing expanded perception has remained consistent at about 5%. That means roughly 250,000 people worldwide have started perceiving five-dimensional reality, and that number grows every day as new people discover the manuscript. Mainstream academia has dismissed my work entirely. Boston University quietly scrubbed my name from their faculty listings. Several psychology journals published papers analysing my case as an example of delusion, folie à plusieurs, or mass hysteria amplified by social media. The scientific consensus is clear. I had a psychotic break and accidentally created a new conspiracy theory that spread virally online. But the people who've read the manuscript and experienced the effects know better. They know what they're seeing is real. They know their apartments contain rooms that shouldn't exist. They know they're making contact with beings from higher dimensional space. And they know that time is running out. Father Gabriele Amorth died September 16th, 2016, at the age of 91. His personal papers remain sealed in the Vatican archives, accessible only to a handful of high-ranking church officials. In his final days before the pneumonia that would kill him, he told Monsignor Torrente that he could see them clearly now. The beings he'd spent 30 years calling demons. He said they were more beautiful than anything he'd ever imagined, and more tragic because of how desperately they'd tried to save us and how completely we'd failed to understand. The thinning continues, accelerating at a rate that matches Lieutenant Hayes' projections from 1916 with disturbing accuracy. At 3:47 a.m. every morning, all around the world, people wake to find their bedrooms have extra dimensions. Some are terrified. Some seek help from priests or psychiatrists. Some find Isabella's videos and learn to cope. And some, like Rachel, begin to understand that they're witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The gradual merger of dimensional spaces that have remained separate for billions of years. The question isn't whether the full merger will happen. According to every account from the entities themselves, it's inevitable. Something is wrong with the fundamental structure of space-time, an anomaly drawing the dimensional membranes together. Within a decade, perhaps two, the separation will end entirely. The question is how many humans will be prepared when it happens? How many will have learned to perceive five-dimensional reality gradually, carefully, with support and guidance? How many will have become bridge humans, capable of translating between species, capable of helping others adapt? Isabella believes we can save at least 10% of humanity if the knowledge spreads fast enough. 10% would be 800 million people, 800 million survivors who could rebuild, who could help establish a new hybrid civilization existing in 5 dimensions instead of 3. But that requires people to listen. It requires people to read the manuscripts, to watch the videos, to practice the perception techniques, to expand their consciousness before the expansion is forced upon them. It requires people to overcome their skepticism, their fear, their attachment to the comfortable three-dimensional reality they've always known. Monsignor Torrente says the children are learning faster than expected. Teenagers and young adults, their brains still plastic enough to adapt, are expanding their perception with relative ease. They're forming communities online and in person, teaching each other and supporting each other. They call themselves the Bridge Generation, and they may be humanity's last hope. The beings from the five-dimensional space have never stopped trying to reach us. They've sacrificed themselves by the thousands, endured unimaginable agony, died in exorcisms and been called demons for their efforts. But they kept coming, they kept trying, they kept hoping that eventually enough humans would understand. And now, finally, some of us do. Father Amorth fought the wrong battle for 30 years, but he understood before he died. He saw clearly at last. He recognized the beings not as demons, but as desperate refugees from a parallel dimension, trying to save both species from mutual extinction. He died with a smile on his face, at peace despite the weight of 160,000 deaths on his conscience, because he finally understood what he had been seeing all along. The journals of the possessed tell a story we should have heard centuries ago. Not a story of demons and damnation, of spiritual warfare and evil entities, but a story of sacrifice and compassion, of beings who gave their lives trying to teach us a lesson we're only now beginning to learn. Reality is larger than we thought. Consciousness can expand. Our three-dimensional existence is only a slice of a much vaster cosmic structure, and we are not alone. We never were. We simply couldn't see far enough to know it, but the veil is thinning. Soon it will fall entirely, and everyone will see what has always been there, waiting patiently in directions we couldn't perceive, hoping desperately that we would learn to understand before it was too late. The question that remains, the question that will determine the fate of human civilization, is this: will we be ready? Will enough of us have learned to see, to understand, to adapt? Will there be enough bridge humans to help translate between dimensions when the final merger occurs? Or will we cling to our comfortable ignorance until five-dimensional reality becomes inescapable, overwhelming billions of unprepared minds, destroying a civilization that refused to listen until it was too late? The knowledge is spreading. The bridge generation is forming. There is still time, though not much. Learn to see, learn to understand, learn to survive. Because they never gave up on us, and we owe it to their sacrifice to not give up on ourselves. The dimensional collision is coming. Make sure you're ready when it arrives.